Okay, here we are. Video 2. Again, we talked about the relationship of bacteria to oxygen. And here's another important thing that certain bacteria do. The nitrogen cycle, we'll talk about this a bit more detail in the ecology section, but this is the movement of nitrogen in its various forms through natural systems. And bacteria in particular play a really important role here in taking nitrogen gas out of the atmosphere, converted into ammonia, a form that plants can use. And so this is extremely important to natural systems, to getting nitrogen into the system such that organisms can make proteins. Nitrification is the conversion of this bacteria, of these forms of nitrogen and proteins into nitrate and nitrite, and then denitrification completes the cycle where these forms of nitrogen are then converted back into nitrogen gas into the air, and there are bacteria that do these steps as well. So, very important process that bacteria have. Here's the family tree or phylogeny of different prokaryotes. We don't have to worry about these names at all, but I'll just point out a couple things. You can see here's the gram-positive bacteria here, related to the cyanobacteria, which are the photosynthetic bacteria. Notice that it's thought that the group that's most closely related to eukaryotes are the archaea, and that at some point prokaryotes split into domain bacteria and then domain archaea, and then a branch broke off of that to form the eukaryotes. Alright, let's focus on the archaea for a moment. These are prokaryotes that are often known as the extremophiles. They live in these unusual environments like hot springs. They're heat-loving prokaryotes, come in these unusual colors. Some that survive in very salty environments, the halophiles. These are ponds in which sea salt is being generated by pumping in seawater and allowing it to evaporate, and this is the salt along the edge here. And the color of the water changes as it's becoming saltier and saltier, and different types of prokaryotes are thriving in them. Also, you have some archaea that are known as the methanogens. They live in areas, typically in relatively oxygen-free areas, and they produce methane as a waste product. And rice paddies are well known to have many of these types of prokaryotes, and they give off a fair amount of methane to the atmosphere. Alright, so related to the nitrogen cycle, just chemical recycling in particular. Again, there's the nitrogen-fixing ones, but many bacteria are decomposers. They eat dead stuff basically and break down those materials and get it back into the soil and then back into the plants. So that's an extremely important role, whether it's decomposers or nitrogen fixing, that bacteria play in natural cycles. Here's the nitrogen cycle again, where the nitrogen fixing bacteria again convert into a form that plants can use. And there's those denitrifying bacteria. Again, we'll talk about this a bit more in the ecology section. Keep in mind, most of the nitrogen is in the atmosphere as N2 gas, and so getting it out of the atmosphere and into living things is an extremely important process. Bacteria form many symbiotic relationships with other organisms. Symbiotic, what's that? Simply meaning a very close relationship. And by itself, symbiotic does not mean beneficial or antagonistic relationship. It's just a close relationship. If it's a mutualism, that's a symbiosis where both organisms are benefiting with each other. We, for example, have bacteria that live in our gut that help with digestion, and that would be a mutualism we have. Parasitism, that's where it's an antagonistic relationship, where you have a bacterium that is basically living in or on another one and feeding off of it to a certain extent. Lyme disease being an example. Commensalism, this is where an unusual relationship where one organism lives in or on another and gains something from that organism, but appears to have no negative effect on that host organism, if you will. All right, back to parasitism or diseases, there's Lyme disease. It's transmitted by ticks, and so ticks essentially are the vector to get the bacterium into a host. In this case, the bacterium is gaining nutrients from the host and completing part of its life cycle in the host. Where other times we have bacteria, like Clostridium botulinum, which really has no desire to be in us. We're not really a host so much. But if it does get inside of us, that's a problem because it produces a compound which is toxic to us and can kill you. So again, it doesn't need you, but if it gets inside you, that's a bad thing. It's an example of an obligate anaerobe. It does not like having oxygen around, and it's known to occur when people do home canning, and even companies that do this, sometimes this can get spread, but this, because it'll thrive in the relatively oxygen-free or anoxic conditions of the cans or the bottles here. Of course, what do you do to try to kill these organisms? You heat the stuff up, and if you cook it well enough, then you should be able to kill them. Bacteria and prokaryotes have been used, of course, in genetics research. We learned about that last semester a lot with genetic engineering. They're vectors to move genes and to copy genes and to make gene products, as we saw. They can also be used out there in the environment for certain functions. For example, here they're spraying a solution with these bacteria that can consume oil. So there's been an oil spill that has got onto these rocks and into the water, and they'll spray down there to consume that oil to clean it up and make it a little less harmful. And as I just mentioned again, we have bacteria that have been engineered to produce certain compounds like human growth hormone or insulin, some that can make vitamins or antibiotics, and again they can be used to clean up situations or extract metals from certain ores. An ore again being a mixture of different types of metals and rock. Okay, that's that. We'll talk about it in class. Thanks.